The first time I noticed something wrong was a Tuesday evening in late September. My husband Daniel came home 3 hours late from work, and when I asked him where he had been, he said he had been stuck in a meeting with a client who wouldn't stop talking. The words came out smoothly, easily, the way a well-rehearsed lie always does. His tie was loosened, his hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a faint smell on his collar that I couldn't identify. Not perfume, not exactly, but something unfamiliar, something that didn't belong to our life. When I leaned in to kiss him, he turned his head slightly so that my lips landed on his cheek instead of his mouth. He had never done that before, not in 7 years of marriage. That was the moment the seed was planted. Small at first, barely noticeable, a tiny splinter of doubt that I could have ignored if I had chosen to. But I didn't choose to. I couldn't. Because once that seed was planted, I started seeing evidence everywhere. The late nights at work became more frequent, 2 or 3 times a week now instead of once a month. His phone, which had always lived on the kitchen counter or the coffee table, suddenly became attached to his hand like a fifth limb, never out of his sight, never left face up where I might see a notification. He started stepping outside to take phone calls, standing on the back patio with his shoulders hunched and his voice too low to hear. When I asked who he was talking to, he said it was work stuff, just work stuff, nothing I needed to worry about. The distance between us grew like a slow, creeping frost. He stopped reaching for me in the night. He stopped laughing at my jokes. He stopped looking at me across the dinner table with that expression of quiet wonder he had worn for the first 6 years of our marriage, the expression that said he couldn't quite believe he got to spend his life with me. In its place was something distant and preoccupied, a preoccupation that seemed to consume him from the inside out. He was physically present in our house, sitting in his favorite chair, eating the meals I cooked, sleeping in our bed, but the man I had married was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I couldn't follow. I did what any woman in my position would do. I talked to my friends. My best friend Sarah, who had been through a divorce 2 years ago and had developed strong opinions about the unreliability of men, told me I needed to confront him directly. My sister, who had a more cautious approach to conflict, suggested couples therapy. My mother, who had been married to my father for 40 years and believed in the sanctity of marriage above all else, told me I was probably imagining things, that Daniel was a good man, that I should trust him and wait for whatever was bothering him to pass. I tried to believe my mother. I really did. But the evidence kept piling up, and the splinter of doubt worked its way deeper into my heart. The breaking point came on a Friday night in early November. Daniel had told me he had another late meeting, the third one that week, and he wouldn't be home until after 9. I had nodded and smiled and told him I would save him some dinner. The good wife, the understanding wife, the wife who trusted her husband implicitly. But something in me had snapped. I couldn't sit at home anymore, staring at the clock, imagining all the places he might be and all the people he might be with. I needed to know the truth, even if the truth would destroy me. I got in my car and drove to his office. His car was in the parking lot, which was the first surprise. I had expected it to be gone, had expected him to have lied about where he was entirely. But there it was, his silver sedan, parked in its usual spot near the entrance. So he was at work after all. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Because I had seen his car in the parking lot before during his supposed late meetings, and I had accepted it as proof of his honesty. But now, sitting in my own car across the street, watching the darkened windows of his office building, I realized that a car in a parking lot didn't prove anything. It only proved that his car was in the parking lot. I waited for almost an hour, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind cycling through 1,000 scenarios. At exactly 8:15, the side door of the office building opened and Daniel emerged. He was alone, which was the second surprise. I had expected him to be with someone, a woman, the reason for all the late nights and the secret phone calls and the distance that had grown between us. But he was alone, walking quickly toward his car with his head down and his shoulders hunched against the cold November wind. He got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. I followed him. I had never followed anyone before in my life, and I was terrible at it, hanging back too far and then speeding up, terrified of losing him and terrified of being caught. But he wasn't looking for a tail. He was driving with the certainty of someone who had made this trip many times before, taking the highway east out of the city, then exiting onto a secondary road that wound through the suburbs and into the rural countryside beyond. The houses grew farther apart, the streetlights disappeared, and the darkness closed in around my car like a blanket. After about 40 minutes, he turned onto a narrow, unmarked road that led into a dense patch of woods. I almost didn't follow. The road was dark, unpaved in places, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But I had come this far. I needed to know. I turned off my headlights and crept forward, using the glow of his taillights as a guide. The road ended at a small parking lot in front of a building that I didn't recognize. It was a low, institutional structure built of gray concrete and surrounded by a high fence. There was a sign near the entrance, but I couldn't read it in the darkness. Daniel parked his car and got out. He stood for a moment in the cold air, his breath forming small clouds, and then he walked toward the entrance of the building. The door opened, spilling yellow light into the darkness, and a figure stepped out to greet him. A woman. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and she was wearing what looked like a nurse's uniform. She and Daniel spoke for a moment, their voices too low and too far away for me to hear, and then they both went inside. I sat in my car, parked in the darkness at the edge of the lot, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A medical facility of some kind, hidden in the woods, an hour outside the city. A nurse. A secret visit that he had lied to me about, over and over again, for months. The pieces were there, but they refused to form a coherent picture. If he was having an affair with the nurse, why meet at a medical facility? If it was a medical issue, why keep it secret from me, his wife? And if it wasn't an affair or a medical issue, what was it? I waited for 2 hours. The cold seeped through the windows of my car, and I wrapped my coat tighter around my body, shivering and miserable and consumed by a dread I couldn't name. At a little after 10:30, Daniel emerged from the building. He was alone. His shoulders were even more hunched than before, and his steps were slow, heavy, the walk of a man carrying an enormous weight. He got in his car and drove away, and I waited until his taillights disappeared before I started my own engine and followed him home. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't know how. I didn't know what to say, what to ask, what accusation to make. He wasn't having an affair, at least not the kind I had imagined. But he was keeping a secret from me, a secret that was consuming him from the inside, a secret that was destroying our marriage one day at a time. And I had no idea what it was. The next day, while Daniel was at work, I drove back to the facility in the woods. In the daylight, it looked less ominous, just a small, well-maintained medical building with neatly trimmed hedges and a parking lot that was mostly empty. The sign near the entrance read, Oak Haven Neurological Care Center. My hands started trembling as I read the words. Neurological care, brain injuries, neurological diseases. The pieces began to rearrange themselves in my mind, forming a picture that was somehow worse than the affair I had imagined. I parked my car and walked inside. The lobby was small and quiet, decorated in soothing shades of blue and green, with comfortable chairs and a reception desk staffed by a young woman with a kind face. I told her I was looking for information about a patient, and she asked me for the patient's name. I realized, with a jolt of shame, that I didn't know. I didn't even know who I was looking for. I told her I was Daniel Morrison's wife, and the recognition that flickered in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. He had been here before, many times. The receptionist asked me to wait, and a few minutes later, the woman I had seen the night before, the tall nurse with the severe bun, came out to meet me. Her name was Dr. Patel, and she was the director of the facility. She led me to her office, a small room lined with books and medical journals, and she asked me to sit down. Mrs. Morrison, she said, her voice calm and professional, I'm glad you're here. Your husband has been carrying this alone for a long time. I've been encouraging him to tell you, but he wasn't ready. He was afraid of how you would react. Tell me what? I asked, and my voice came out as a whisper. What is he hiding from me? What is this place? Dr. Patel folded her hands on her desk, her expression one of careful compassion. This is a long-term care facility for patients with severe neurological conditions. We specialize in traumatic brain injuries, advanced dementia, and other disorders that require around-the-clock medical supervision. Your husband has been coming here 3 times a week for the past 8 months to visit a patient. A woman named Catherine Reyes. The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard it before, not from Daniel, not from his family, not from anyone. Who is Catherine Reyes? I asked, and the question felt like a stone dropping into a deep well. Catherine Reyes is your husband's sister, Dr. Patel said. His older sister. She was admitted here 6 years ago, after a car accident left her with a severe traumatic brain injury. She requires total care. She cannot speak, cannot move, cannot communicate in any meaningful way. She is kept alive by feeding tubes and ventilators and a team of dedicated medical professionals. Dr. Patel paused, letting the words sink in. And until 8 months ago, your husband didn't know she existed. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to anchor myself, trying to make sense of the words that had just come out of Dr. Patel's mouth. I don't understand, I said. Daniel doesn't have a sister. He's an only child. His parents died when he was in college, and he never mentioned a sister. He would have told me if he had a sister. Your husband was raised as an only child, Dr. Patel said gently. But he wasn't one. Catherine was born when Daniel was 3 years old. She had a different father, a man his mother had a brief relationship with before she met Daniel's father. When his parents married, they made the decision to put Catherine up for adoption. She was adopted by a family in another state, and Daniel's parents never spoke of her again. Daniel grew up never knowing he had a sister. I closed my eyes, trying to process the enormity of what I was hearing. Daniel's parents, the people I had seen in photographs but never met, the people he spoke of with a mixture of love and sadness, had kept a secret this enormous from their own son. They had erased a child from their family history as if she had never existed. And Daniel had grown up believing he was alone in the world. 8 months ago, Dr. Patel continued, Catherine's adoptive parents both passed away within a few weeks of each other. Her adoptive father from a heart attack, her adoptive mother from complications of diabetes. Catherine had no other family. The state took custody of her, and as part of the process of determining her care, they conducted a search for biological relatives. That search led them to Daniel. He was notified that he had a sister, that she was in a vegetative state in a care facility, and that he was her only living relative. A sound escaped my throat, something between a sob and a gasp. 8 months. For 8 months, Daniel had been carrying this secret, visiting his sister in a facility an hour away, grappling with the revelation that his entire childhood had been built on a lie. And he hadn't told me. He hadn't told anyone. He had been doing it alone, carrying the weight of this tragedy on his own shoulders, while I sat at home and convinced myself he was having an affair. Why didn't he tell me? I asked, and the question was directed as much at myself as at Dr. Patel. I'm his wife. We tell each other everything. Or I thought we did. Why would he keep this from me? Dr. Patel's expression softened further, and I saw in her eyes the same compassion she must have shown Daniel during his visits. He told me he was afraid, she said. Afraid that you would see him differently if you knew the truth about his family. Afraid that the shame of what his parents did would somehow reflect on him. Afraid that you would be angry at him for not knowing, for not finding her sooner, for not being able to save her. Grief and guilt are complicated emotions, Mrs. Morrison. They don't always follow logical paths. Shame. He had been feeling shame. Not for something he had done, but for something that had been done to him. A secret that his parents had kept, and that he had only discovered after they were both dead and could no longer answer for what they had done. He had been drowning in guilt for 8 months, and instead of reaching for me, instead of letting me help him carry the weight, he had pushed me away. He had let me believe the worst of him rather than tell me the truth. Can I see her? I asked. Catherine, can I meet her? Dr. Patel led me down a long, quiet hallway to a room at the end of the corridor. The door was partially open, and I could hear the soft, rhythmic sound of a ventilator, the beeping of monitors, the hushed, sterile silence of a place where life was sustained by machines. I stepped inside, and I saw her. Catherine Reyes lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by equipment that breathed for her, fed her, monitored the faint electrical activity in her damaged brain. She was thin, impossibly thin, her face pale and gaunt, her dark hair spread across the pillow like a shadow. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the ceiling with the blank, uncomprehending gaze of someone who was present in body but absent in spirit. There were no flowers in the room, no cards, no photographs. Just the machines and the silence, and the woman who had been erased from her own family before she was old enough to speak. But there was one personal item, a small, framed photograph on the bedside table. I picked it up with trembling hands, and I saw that it was a picture of Daniel. A recent one, taken at our home, the one I had snapped with my phone last summer when he was grilling in the backyard and laughing at something stupid I had said. He must have printed it out and brought it here, placed it where his sister could see it, even though she couldn't see anything, couldn't recognize him, couldn't know that her brother had finally found her. I stood there for a long time, looking at Catherine, trying to find traces of Daniel in her face. The shape of her jaw was similar, the curve of her eyebrows, the darkness of her hair. She was his sister, his family, the family he had never known he had, and now that he had found her, she was lost to him in every way that mattered. I was still standing there when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and Daniel was standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock and fear. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers, the kind you buy at a grocery store, and his hand was trembling so badly the petals were shaking. "Elena," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. "How did you find this place? How long have you been here?" "I followed you," I said, and the confession came out before I could stop it. "Last night, I followed you from your office. I thought you were having an affair. I thought you were cheating on me. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry I didn't trust you." The flowers fell from his hand and scattered on the floor. He didn't seem to notice. He was staring at me with an expression of utter devastation, the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself crumbling before my eyes. "I was going to tell you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was going to tell you so many times, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain that my parents lied to me my entire life. I didn't know how to explain that I have a sister who doesn't know I exist, who will never know I exist, who has been lying in this bed for 6 years while I went about my life completely unaware. I didn't know how to tell you that I've been coming here 3 times a week, sitting by her bed, talking to her, hoping that somewhere inside that broken brain she can hear me. I didn't know how to tell you any of it without falling apart." I crossed the room and took him in my arms, and he collapsed against me, his body shaking with sobs he had been holding back for 8 months. I held him as tightly as I could, my own tears falling into his hair, and I realized that everything I had believed about our marriage, about the distance between us, about the secrets he was keeping, had been wrong. He hadn't been pushing me away because he didn't love me. He had been pushing me away because he loved me too much to burden me with a truth he could barely carry himself. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, the same question I had asked Dr. Patel, but this time directed at the man I loved. "Why didn't you let me help you?" "Because I was ashamed," he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "Ashamed of my parents, ashamed of what they did, ashamed that I never knew. And because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew the truth about where I came from, about the kind of family I have, you would look at me differently. You would see the damage, the dysfunction, the lies. And I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." I pulled back just enough to look at his face, to meet his eyes, to make sure he was hearing every word I was about to say. "Daniel, listen to me. You are not your parents. What they did was wrong, but it has nothing to do with you. You were a child. You didn't know. And the fact that you've been coming here 3 times a week for 8 months, sitting with a sister who can't even acknowledge your presence, proves exactly who you are. You are a good man, a kind man, a man who takes responsibility for things that aren't his fault because he can't bear to let someone suffer alone." I cupped his face in my hands, wiping away his tears with my thumbs. "I didn't fall in love with you because you came from a perfect family. I fell in love with you because of who you are. and nothing you could tell me about your past would ever change that." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face for any sign of judgment or rejection. He didn't find any, because there was none to find. I was angry, yes, but not at him. I was angry at his parents, who had erased a child from existence and lied to their son for his entire life. I was angry at a world that had allowed Catherine to lie in this bed for 6 years with no family, no visitors, no one to hold her hand or bring her flowers. I was angry at the cruelty of a situation that had forced my husband to carry this burden alone. But I was not angry at him. I could never be angry at him for this. "I want to meet her," I said. "Properly. I want you to introduce me to your sister." Daniel's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "She can't hear you," he said. "The doctors say she has no awareness, no consciousness. She doesn't know I'm here. She doesn't know anyone is here." "I don't care," I said. "She's your family. That means she's my family too. And family doesn't abandon each other. Family shows up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." I took his hand, the same hand that had been carrying the weight of this secret for 8 months, and I led him to the chair beside Catherine's bed. "Introduce me." He sat down heavily, his eyes moving from me to his sister and back again. Then he took a deep breath, the first deep breath I had seen him take in months, and he spoke. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is Elena, my wife. I'm sorry I didn't bring her sooner. I was scared. I'm not scared anymore." I pulled up another chair and sat beside him, taking his hand and holding it tightly. We stayed there for hours, the three of us, Daniel and I, talking to Catherine in low voices, telling her about our lives, our home, the backyard where Daniel grilled in the summer, the garden I was trying and failing to grow. We told her about our wedding, about the trip we had taken to Italy, about the dog we had adopted from the shelter last year. We filled the silence with words, knowing she probably couldn't hear any of them, but hoping that somewhere, in the depths of her damaged brain, some small part of her could feel that she was no longer alone. In the weeks and months that followed, everything changed. The distance between Daniel and me evaporated, replaced by a closeness that was deeper and more honest than anything we had shared before. We went to see Catherine together 3 times a week, and we made her room as warm and personal as we could. We brought flowers, photographs, a soft blanket for her bed. We hung a painting that Daniel had made when he was in college, an abstract swirl of colors that he had always been proud of. We made sure that she was surrounded by evidence that she was loved, even if she couldn't perceive it. Daniel started seeing a therapist, a kind, patient woman who specialized in helping people process family trauma. He talked about his parents, about the lies they had told, about the sister he had been denied the chance to know. He talked about the guilt he felt, the irrational but persistent belief that he should have known, should have found her sooner, should have been able to save her. Slowly, session by session, the guilt began to loosen its grip on him. He started to understand that he had been a victim of his parents' choices, not a perpetrator of them. He started to forgive himself for something that had never been his fault. And I started to see our marriage with new eyes. I had spent months suspecting the worst of the man I loved, assuming that his distance was evidence of betrayal, jumping to the most painful conclusion without ever stopping to consider that there might be another explanation. I had been so consumed by my own fear and insecurity that I had missed the obvious signs that my husband was suffering, drowning in a grief he didn't know how to share. I had let my imagination torture me with visions of infidelity when the truth was something far more tragic and far more understandable. I apologized to Daniel more times than I could count, and each time, he told me it wasn't necessary. "You didn't know," he would say. "I didn't give you any reason to trust me. I was distant, I was secretive, I was lying about where I was going. You were right to be suspicious. Any wife would have been. But I knew that my suspicion had been about more than his behavior. It had been about my own insecurity, my own fear of abandonment, my own inability to trust that someone could love me completely and without reservation. The crisis in our marriage had revealed something about me that I didn't like, and I was determined to change it. We started going to couples therapy together, the same therapist Daniel had been seeing individually. We learned to communicate in ways we never had before, to share our fears and our vulnerabilities instead of hiding them behind walls of silence. We learned to trust each other not just with the easy parts of life, but with the hard parts, the messy parts, the parts that made us feel ashamed or afraid. We learned that a marriage is not a performance, not a carefully curated display of perfection, but a partnership, a commitment to showing up for each other even when showing up is the hardest thing in the world. On the 1-year anniversary of the day I followed Daniel to Oak Haven, we visited Catherine together, as we always did. We brought flowers, yellow roses, the same kind Daniel had dropped on the floor a year ago. We sat by her bed and talked to her, telling her about our year, about the progress we had made, about the future we were building. And then we did something we hadn't done before. We thanked her. "Thank you," Daniel said, holding his sister's still, cool hand. "Thank you for bringing us here, for forcing me to confront the truth about my family, for showing Elena who I really am, and for showing me who she really is. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if you'll ever know how much you've changed my life. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful you exist. I'm grateful I found you. And I will keep coming here, every week, for as long as I live. You're not alone anymore. You'll never be alone again." I watched my husband speak to his sister, and I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of love, of awe at the resilience of the human heart. The man I had married had been through something unimaginable, and instead of breaking, he had grown stronger. Instead of pushing me away permanently, he had let me in. And in the process, he had taught me something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Love is not about never doubting. It's about doubting and choosing to trust anyway. It's about suspecting the worst and discovering the truth and letting the truth change you. It's about following your husband into the dark woods, not because you want to catch him doing something wrong, but because you want to understand what's hurting him so you can help him carry the weight. Catherine never recovered. She never opened her eyes with recognition or squeezed Daniel's hand or spoke a single word. The doctors said she never would. But Daniel and I continued to visit her every week, without fail. We became part of the fabric of Oak Haven, familiar faces to the nurses and the staff and the other families who were also caring for loved ones who would never come home. We started a support group for families of long-term care patients, a place where people could share their stories and their struggles without judgment. We turned our tragedy into something that could help others, and in doing so, we found a purpose that neither of us had expected. The darkest night of our marriage had led us to a truth we never could have imagined. And in the light of that truth, we had found our way back to each other. Not the same as before. Stronger, truer, more real. We had stopped pretending that our marriage was perfect, and in doing so, we had made it something far more valuable. We had made it honest. We had made it resilient. We had made it a place where secrets could be spoken and burdens could be shared and love could flourish, not despite the hard truths, but because of them. I still think about that Tuesday evening in September, the night I first noticed something wrong. The loosened tie, the unfamiliar smell, the kiss that landed on my cheek instead of my lips. I had been so certain I knew what those signs meant. I had been so wrong. And I am grateful, every single day, that I was wrong. Because if I had been right, if Daniel had been having an affair, I would have lost my marriage. Instead, I found the truth. I found my husband's hidden heart. I found a sister I never knew I had. And I found a depth of love I never knew existed, a love that could survive secrets and suspicions and the most devastating revelations, a love that was not diminished by the truth, but made stronger by it. The last time I visited Catherine, I placed a new photograph on her bedside table. It was a picture of Daniel and me on our 8th anniversary, standing in front of the restaurant where we had our first date. We were both laughing, our faces flushed with happiness, our arms wrapped around each other. I put the photograph next to the one of Daniel grilling in the backyard, and I whispered a promise into the quiet room. "I'll take care of him," I said. "For both of us. I'll take care of your brother. I promise." And I have kept that promise every day since.